So a ton of races to watch out for. What I find so fascinating about Virginia is Terry Haynes of Pangea Policy says it's the only one to look out for because what happens this evening for Glenn Youngkin could path a different future for the Republican presidential election, whether it's 2024 or 2028.
Absolutely. Glenn Youngkin tonight is not on the ballot himself, but he needs to flip 3 seats in the state Senate so that Republicans have total control over the Virginia government. Otherwise, right now, the Democrats have the Senate and Republicans have the House. If his campaigning was successful and he can flip those 3 seats to the Republican side, one of the things he will do is enact a 15-week ban on abortion, which is a really interesting position because, as we know, governors in Texas and Florida and other very conservative states have gone to 6-week or 8-week bans. 15 weeks is a sort of split down the middle kind of position, and he will do that. But that will test whether he is a viable presidential candidate. If not this year, then almost certainly in 2028, or at least there will be pressure on him to do so in 2028.
And of course, abortion is really a common denominator across a lot of these elections today. As I said, it's literally on the ballot in Ohio with issue 1. Are we about to find out if it still has the same potency, the ability to drive turnout as in the immediate aftermath of Roe versus Wade being overturned?
Exactly, Kailey. That's what we're watching for tonight. If in Ohio there is a constitutional amendment to enshrine abortion rights in the ballot, it looks like it might pass because earlier this year there was a special election in which anti-abortion activists put on the ballot something to make it harder to pass a constitutional amendment. Everyone knew that was an effort to stop this abortion referendum, and that failed. So they have the numbers they need, and if people turn out and vote in a special election, then that might be enshrined in the Ohio Constitution. And Ohio is a Trump Republican state.
Well, it'll be a big nod to President Biden if people go out and vote for abortion, because it's the one area he is still leading in the polls. When you look at the latest New York Times, Siena poll, the former president, Donald Trump, is eating away at Biden when it comes to the economy, when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to things like abortion. The Democrats still have a stronghold. Yes. How are you looking at these off elections and what the tea leaves may tell us about next year?
Well, the interesting thing, Virginia will be the only place that's really a good look at 2024 presidential election. And the key there is ex-urban voters and the sort of suburban voters that are a little further out on slightly less urban parts of suburban areas. And there'll be a key swing constituency next time, and they are the key to the Virginia legislative races. So we'll see how that's going. The one thing is you just need to take all of this with a grain of salt because the world will change in a year. Typically, a year ahead of an election, an incumbent president is weaker. Trump will be going through some criminal trials that might weaken him. On the other hand, there's stuff going on in the Mideast that poses risks both to the Democratic coalition and to the U.S. economy that could make things worse for Biden. So it's an interesting X-ray, particularly about this one decisive, important group of voters, but it's just a check of how they're doing right now.
What about some of the gubernatorial races, like in Kentucky, where Andy Beshear is a Democratic incumbent in a state that went for Trump by a wide margin in the last presidential election, and yet his Republican challenger is essentially trying to make the gubernatorial race about national politics and say, hey, Beshear is in the same camp as President Biden? Or isn't that kind of a signal about the issue of a low-polling incumbent Democratic president and what it may mean for Democratic incumbents down the ballot?
It certainly tells you what Republicans in Kentucky think is their best play against Beshear's. But Beshear's has been a pretty popular Democratic governor who's managed to rise above these partisan differences and has his own personal following in Kentucky. So even if he survives and does well, that doesn't necessarily tell you that much about Biden's prospects a year down the road, in my view.
Well, he's a unicorn. And if he's able to win again, do you think he has higher political ambitions?
I don't know. You'd have to ask Wendy. She follows national politics more closely than I do.
Wendy?
On that.
There is no politician
he
who wins a lot and doesn't have ambitions. If you're a politician, you're ambitious for higher office. So yes, there's also Mississippi, but Mississippi, where a Democrat is competitive for the governorship of Mississippi, which would be unheard of in 50 years. However, in this case, it's not as much of a bellwether because the Republican Governor Tate Reeves has been sidelined with corruption allegations, stealing or misappropriating welfare money, things like that. And so if a Democrat wins, it will be more a statement about Tate Reeves than it is about national Republicans.
Fascinating. And of course, we're all sitting here on Capitol Hill tonight, where there is a certain lack of progress forward in terms of keeping the government funded, sorting out aid to not just Israel, but Ukraine as well. How much does the relative dysfunction in the building behind us color the way voters are thinking when they go to the polls, Mike?
My instinct is not that much. I think they're more focused on perceptions of Biden as a leader, abortion, and perceptions of the economy. Something that really struck me was I just saw some data today on how much extra debt younger Americans have taken on, and that's the same group of people that you see have lost some of their enthusiasm for Biden. So it's really the economics that's weighing on people at the moment. This turmoil here at the moment, in my view, probably will not necessarily have a big impact either now or in 2024. But the divisions within the Republican Party and their potential to create further tumult during the year is the big risk for Republicans going into 2024. So less about what happens right now than what these splits and fighting and dysfunction tells you about what might happen further down the road.
Wendy, do you agree?
Yes, I do. I think that that's absolutely the case. These sort of little kerfuffles that go on right now don't last that long. In a year from now, even if the government does shut down in a week or so, in 10 days, then by November of 24, if the government's up and running, people will be mad that it's running, not that it's not shut down. And that's what they'll focus on. But I think there are also divisions right now in the Democratic Party that are creating headwinds for President Biden right now. Divisions over his full-throated support for Israel, divisions over student debt, over missed promises. And that is affecting not only young people, but the black voters who put him in office in 2020.